Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do a review of March on the Drina from Princeps Games. In short, this is a game of Serbia's story in World War I. Let's do a quick overview of the game before we jump in and do a review. This game spans from 1914 to 1918. Each turn is 4 months. You're going to be playing basically the full length of World War I from the Serbian perspective. The map is a nice mounted map. It focuses almost entirely on Serbia, although the map extends out into areas surrounding Serbia like Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Montenegro, Albania, and Greece surrounding Serbia. But most of your fighting and most of the actions happening in Serbia. Basically, you've got Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Bulgaria teaming up, trying to take Serbia out of the war. If you're Serbia, you're going to be fighting on the defensive and then trying to turn that around and come back onto the offensive and eventually control most of the cities in Serbia, which is your kind of basic win condition. Unit scale is a little bit ambiguous, but you've got cavalry, infantry, artillery, and generals, your 4 basic unit types. They each have different advantages and disadvantages, and you're going to be maneuvering them on Serbia basically to try to take as many cities as you possibly can. Game plays in about 2 to 3 hours. I played a solitaire version of the game, and it took me about 2.5 to 3 hours to play through the whole thing. So it's not a very difficult game to learn. I'm going to say complexity is about a 3 out of 10. With all that said, let's jump in now to our power review. I feel like March of Drina is a good, yet not great, war game. However, I think it is an admirable effort and an admirable first war game from Princeps Games, which is a small design studio in Serbia. So for a first war game, I think they've got a lot right. And the other word I would use to describe this war game is promising. Because if we talk about the positives in this, there are a number of very innovative ideas in this game. So I think if you're a student of game design and you're interested in kind of seeing how games are designed, there is a lot to look at and explore in this game because some of the creative ways they've looked at and tried to tackle kind of traditional war game problems. We'll talk more about those in the full review. With that innovation comes a number of things that I really like about this game. I absolutely love the turn record system. It's a calendar and you flip over the calendar, you get some history of the time that's going on in that time span in World War I and in Serbia, and that gives all the information that you need to be able to execute that turn. It's brilliant, it's really fun, it's super creative. I also really liked the generals in the game, the way they've executed leadership. They each get their own individual card, talks about their history, they've got unique skills, and it really adds a lot of flavor to the game. I thought that was a really fun and well done element. The overall design and components level of the game is really strong as well, with one exception that I'll talk about in the negatives momentarily. Most importantly, I enjoyed the gameplay. It's got a good balance to it. There's some ebb and flow in there, and it's fun to play, also very accessible, so it's not a hard game to learn at all. Lastly, I felt like I learned a lot about Serbia's story in World War I by playing this game, connecting it both to the greater picture that was going on in World War I and what happened in Serbia between Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Bulgaria. It's a fun little game. When you're done with this game, you're going to know a lot more about Serbia's World War I history. On a negative side, while it's very innovative, I wasn't such a huge fan with the mechanic for representing the different strength levels of units. And I'll talk more about that in the in-depth review. Overall, while I really like the overall art design of this game, there is a decision about the counter art that created this kind of very odd mood as I was playing the game. Lastly, there really isn't terrain in this game. There are some mountains that are impassable, and there are some cities that can impact gameplay depending upon the traits of different generals. But for the most part, it's a flat Serbia with no real distinction by terrain. I understand why that was done in terms of accessibility and making the game simple and accessible and smooth to play, but I felt like there was a missed opportunity to really bring some more richness to this experience by creating kind of a geographic landscape that would have offered more variety for gameplay. And with all that said, let's now jump into our full review. So now let's go into detail on some of the features about the game. First up, I think there's a lot of things I really enjoyed about the gameplay. The gameplay has a balance and an ebb and flow to it. It's really cool because as you start out, Serbia is on the defensive, so you've got these 3 powers that are coming at you from basically 2 sides, and you're trying to fight off and protect as many cities as you can if you're Serbia, and you're trying to take as many cities as you can if you're Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Bulgaria. Countries go in turn, so the Germans and Austria-Hungarians are going to go first, and then Serbia is going to try to make some moves, and then Bulgaria goes next, and Bulgaria is coming in from the east, Austria-Hungary are pouring down from the north, and Serbia is really hard-pressed in the beginning of the game to be able to do much except defend. Now, when I played this game, I played really poorly as Serbia in the beginning, so they really got pressed hard. But then, about halfway through the game, there's this mechanic that allows Serbian forces to pull through Albania and then come out Greece be basically kind of brought back up to full strength, and you can actually bring in a significant amount of reinforcements that way. So about halfway through this game, you've got this option for Serbia, which is just getting pounded, to basically rebuild their army and try a counteroffensive to push back up the Serbian from south to north, push back up through Serbia and drive out the enemies. So it's got a really good ebb and flow to the game, and I feel like there's been a lot of play testing done on the game. So the gameplay is very smooth and very elegant. It's easy to execute, it plays fast, and yet there's a lot of really fun decisions. Each of the different units, infantry, cavalry, and then artillery, are equally important. They match up really well. There's a really cool card draw system that allows you to resolve combat, so there isn't an over-reliance on dice rolls. It feels very balanced, and if you make good decisions and you can attack where you have strength and try to set up your defense so that you can avoid being overpowered in one place or another, it plays out really fun. It's got a good balance to it. Now, I mentioned a little bit about the lack of terrain. I want to bring that back in because I think that is, again, a missed opportunity with this. And I understand what they were trying to do. You know, they want to make a simple game that's going to be accessible for people to come in and for beginners to wargaming to come in. And that's what I think you see with a lot with the visual appeal of the game and some of the gameplay decisions. Yet having said that, the lack of terrain in the game does mean that it feels like certain things are happening over and over again. You know, where you're attacking from the north, and as you fall back, there's really not much to fall back into except another spot on the map where you're trying to defend more cities. And then if you get pushed back there as Serbia, you're trying to fall back and defend again, but it's the same basic geographic kind of problems that you've got, which is you're playing on a flat surface. Now, as you get down south, there's some mountains that can kind of impede gameplay and kind of create some decisions about which way do you go, and you can kind of channel some forces. But for the most part, you're playing on kind of a flat surface of Serbia. And as much as I appreciate the simplicity and the game flow of that, I feel like there's enough complexity here that leaving out a terrain system eventually creates some situations where it makes it less interesting, both as an attacker and both as a defender. I think you could have created some really neat problems by layering in even a very simple terrain system into the game. Another big positive of the game is how good of a job the game does at feeling like you're part of Serbia's history in World War I. And this would be a place where I would definitely recommend the game. If you are a wargamer that's interested in World War I history, there aren't any that I know of that covers this topic. So it's great to see a game that's willing to boldly kind of step into that element of that aspect of World War I and tell this story. So from that perspective, I feel like I learned a lot about the Serbian conflict in World War I, how it happened, some of the components to it, and yet at the same time, that really neat calendar turn-based turn record track. So you basically have this kind of tabletop calendar, and you flip it over to show the next 4 months and the next turn. And then there's a couple paragraphs of history about what was going on in World War I, and then what was going on in Serbia at that time. So you get Serbia story connected to the greater story of World War I. And I felt like every time I was turning a new turnover, that's kind of the one of the things I was really looking forward to. I like turn over the calendar, look at the next 4 months, and just by flipping over the calendar, it creates this really neat sense of time passage. It just felt like, oh, time advanced. And it's just a brilliant turn system that really helps pull you into the history, because I just read the history like, oh, that's cool, that's happening, and then, okay, what's happening in my game right now that's different from the real history, and be able to compare and contrast it. So I felt like when I was done playing the game, I learned a lot about Serbia's role in World War I. So in terms of connecting to history, this is a very good game for that. If you're interested, I think, it's definitely as a recommendation, if you're interested in World War I history and don't have a conflict on this area, I think you can learn a lot from this, and it would be, it's a very good game to explore if you're interested particularly in World War I history and in Serbia's role in the war. Another element that connects to that sense of history that you get from this game is the way that the game depicts leadership in the sense of generals and their individual general cards. So each side's going to have anywhere from 1 to, say, 3 generals in play at a given point in time, and they connect directly to historical figures. And these cards have basically a paragraph about that general's history and some of the things that they may have done. And then each general has a unique skill that can be brought to bear at certain times during a turn. So it's just a really kind of, I won't say it's a very simple mechanic, and yet it creates a lot of flavor to gameplay, and again helps you connect to the idea of these are real people and the leaders of this time that were fighting this conflict in Serbia. So it's very, very well done. It was another one of my really favorite elements of gameplay in this system. And since we talked about the calendar and the generals cards, it's probably a good time to mention a couple of words in more depth about the components. I really like the way they've portrayed this game in terms of kind of the colorful nature of the map. It's a really nice, well-developed mounted board. You look at the map of Serbia and it looks really inviting to play in it. And then you have some counters that, and we'll talk about the way they're used later, but I just want to talk about the visual representation. So you've got counters that again are either artillery, cavalry, infantry, or generals, and they stand up on their own little stands. So the game has a vertical height to it that's really kind of visually appealing as you look at this game. So the components are top-notch, everything from the cards, again the calendar, the counters and everything, really well produced, and there's strong visual appeal. It's a really colorful game. And I think when you're talking about making an accessible war game where you could potentially bring in people that are new to the hobby or bring in kind of kids that might be interested in kind of learning to play a war game, this certainly, I think the age limit is 14 plus. You can go younger with someone a little bit precocious. I think you could come down to about 10 years old, maybe even a little bit younger with this one. And they, if they're determined, they could learn how to play this. So I think this could be a great gateway game because of its visual appeal and because of its kind of pop that it's going to have as people look at this system. Having said that, okay, there's one particular element of the counters that kept, it's a little bit jarring to me. So it's a noble gesture. It's kind of something, again, where I think this is a creative way to say thank you to the people that helped promote the game and to people that helped work on the game. But each one of the counters in the game has the face of either it might be someone who runs a YouTube channel, or it might be someone, I suspect it's kind of designers or developers or play testers in this game that really were kind of the supporting team, if you would, that helped bring this game to reality. So as a gesture of kindness, what it appears that the developers have done, what the designers have done, is to bring the faces of these characters in the game, to bring in the real faces of these people and put them on the units in the game. You know, it's a really nice gesture, it's a way to say thank you, and it's cool. If you helped, you know, promote a game, or you helped kind of work on the game or play test the game, now all of a sudden you're in the game, and that sounds really cool, right? Except here's the thing, okay? Most of the people, there's two things with it. First up, most of the people that worked on the game appeared to be middle-aged or older. So you've got this kind of unique kind of, I would say, elderly feel to the combatants in the game. So the first thing is you're kind of looking and it's like, why is everybody so old? And I don't mean this in a bad way. Not everybody looks old, but you know, certainly like middle-aged and older with a few younger ones scattered. And it was like, wouldn't the soldiers be kind of younger in this game, in this conflict? And so that's there. And then the other thing is that I know a number of these people in real life from having watched their YouTube channels. So it creates this kind of odd disconnect between this really game that's kind of does such a good job, that's kind of steeped in history, and then yet as you're fighting it out, like, oh, these two YouTubers are going at it on top of Serbia. So it kind of, it was just weird, right? It's just kind of odd. So I felt like it throws you out of the historical context in a way that I'm sure was completely unintended. And so even though the gesture is a really cool way, another way that I think, you know, this company kind of highlights how they think out of the box. They just kind of doing these cool ways to say thank you to the people that helped them. It's a really nice gesture, but the sum of it all, when you have every single unit that's kind of an elderly, in most cases, there's a couple female units, I think, but mostly older men, you're kind of like, why is everyone so old? And why are there YouTubers in Serbia? You know, so it just was, it kept pulling me out of that historical context. And I think it does, in essence, kind of create a jarring disconnect between that really neat historical element that the game has because of that just juxtaposition of modern characters with the components, the map, the cards, the calendar, and everything like that. I've pulled out some pieces from the game here because I want to spend a little bit of time talking about one of the novel mechanics in the game that I think deserves a lot of praise for being attempted, but ultimately it felt like to me it fell a little bit short. It creates more problems than it solves. And this is March on Drina's kind of unique way of solving a wargaming question of how do you construct a unit with a number of steps to it in a game. So most war games, for example, units will have 3 steps, right? They'll have the front-facing counter, the top of the counter, that's its 2-step level, and then if a unit takes some damage, it gets flipped over and you see the 1-step level to it, and then if the unit takes further damage, it gets wiped out. And other ones might have status markers on there, things like shaken and stuff like that. But war games generally use counters and flip counters over to kind of represent different levels of strength and things like that. And I've also seen games too where you quarter turn them. So you've got 4 levels and you can kind of quarter turn the unit that way to get at a greater variety of unit step strength. And in March of Drina, each of the units has 3 levels of strength. It has just itself, if you just have the stack of the unit here like we're looking at this one right here, this is at the 1 strength level. If you get a second level of strength, you take this little magnetic piece here and you stick it onto the bottom, and now the unit is at 2 strength itself plus this extra strength marker. And it can go up to a 3rd strength point, which you can kind of just attach by just tapping it and pulling it on like that. And now you've got this 3rd level of strength, and this is maximum strength for any given unit. And so units can be at 1, 2, or 3 different levels of strength, assuming that it's still there. If it takes another hit, if this unit, which has no magnets on it, takes a hit of damage and it's wiped out. So you've got basically 4 different levels, right? 3, 2, 1, and 0 for all units. And it's a way of a kind of a designer saying, how can we create a system in a war game where units have more than just those 3 steps, 2, 1, or 0. I want to have greater variety in those steps. And what's a creative way to do that? And so they created this system with the magnets to kind of do that, to represent different strengths in the unit. I've seen it also done too where you just kind of swap out counters. So each unit might be represented by 2 counters, 4 sides. You know, that's another way, a more traditional way I think that a war game would do this. So it's really great to see the innovation behind this kind of thinking, and as a designer saying, how could we do this in a way that's more creative? The other thing that this does, it creates that kind of 3-dimensional view to this game, which makes it really kind of impressive when you're kind of looking at that game from a visual representation. Again, highlighting that appeal, highlighting that kind of accessibility, and drawing people in to want to play the game. So there's a number of positives, I think, here. Plus, it's kind of easy to access. You kind of pull it off, and one of these pulls off, and you drop it off, and things like that. The issues, though, those are the positive features of this. But I think when you play the game, what you realize is there are a number of issues with this where it spawns other kind of gameplay elements that it creates some difficulties or challenges with gameplay. One of which is when you kind of just visually parse a unit. Because some of these units are actually a different height, so here's all the units at 1 strength: artillery, infantry, cavalry. Cavalry is taller than infantry and is taller than artillery. So what happened a lot when I was playing, for example, is just my brain is parsing units based on the total height. So I'd kind of scan the units, and sometimes because the units are in front of each other, you can't really see the base that's behind the unit, you know, if it's on a hex like that. So as you're scanning it, I would look and think, oh, these 2 units are the same strength because they're the same height. And then say, no, oh, wait a second, no, this one's got 2 magnets on it. This one doesn't have any. So this one's actually at a 3 strength level, and this one's at a 1 strength level. So visually, I found that my brain was doing more things to be able to process the information it needed on the battlefield. The second thing that happens with this too is that, you know, infantry have an attack strength of 2 and a defense strength of 3. So this maximum strength infantry unit has an attack strength of 3 plus 1 for each step. So it's an attack strength of 2 plus 1 for each step. So this would be 1, 2, 3. 2 plus 3 means this infantry has an attack strength of 5. And that's a number that you're trying to get to each time you're doing a combat calculation. And what I found was, though, that sometimes when the units are all stacked up on the board, it was really hard for me to visually kind of make an assessment. Again, I think sometimes because the units are at different heights, as to what the strength of the unit was. So I'd look at a unit and say, oh, okay, this is a maximum strength cavalry, it's an attack strength of 3, and it's got a strength of 3, it looks like. And then I pick it up and realize, oh, no, wait, there's only 2 there, so it's a strength of 2, 3 plus 2 is 5. So a lot of times I find myself having to do these little calculations. And when you're doing lots of those little calculations, I kind of found myself wishing for a unit with a number, right? Because then I don't have to do any of those calculations. So as much as I appreciated the innovation behind this system and the attempt to create something that was rather unique to express a multiplicity of levels of unit strength, I found that it was requiring my brain, in a game that's kind of emphasizing accessibility, to do a lot more of that little math that I felt like, wow, it would have been really nice if I didn't have to do that, because I would like to just visually parse the battlefield and be able to see what the strengths of units are and to be able to figure out where I wanted to go. And I kept wanting a number to do that rather than having to do the 3 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 3. Oh no, wait, that's 3 plus 2 to be able to figure out what the units were. The other element behind that too, and these are Serbian units, is that the Serbian forces I mentioned earlier has a mechanic where they can flee through Albania and come out through Greece, and they get brought up back to full strength. Or if it's a general, he comes out with actually 2 infantry units with him as well. So, however, a unit can only do that once per game, and so that there's these little tokens that you put with the Serbian units to let you know that the units made that move. And what I found was the only way to put them, you got to put them under the piece because the unit takes up the whole piece, which creates another issue because now you've got an extra element of height in here, which made it even more challenging to visually kind of parse which piece was at which strength and things like that. And then because the units are so vertical, the magnets really help because sometimes you're kind of reaching behind the unit to pick it up. So it was nice to get everything so you didn't have to kind of dive in there with your fingers and try to get these other kind of bottom strength pieces out there. So this works really well, except now when you've got the Albanian kind of the movement piece in there, you reach down, you're like, oh, darn it, I need that little counter there too. So you're kind of fiddling and reaching behind the units and bumping units to get them out and moving it together. So the Albanian piece here negates the simplicity of this magnet system, which allows you to kind of pick the unit up without messing all the units up around it. So it's a case where I felt like it's a really cool, innovative idea that kind of works and kind of doesn't work. For as many problems as it solves, it kind of spawned a number of other problems that kept kind of creating some friction in the gameplay that I wished wasn't there. I should also mention that in defense of this vertical system with the magnets, the developers did create this kind of alternative counter-based system where I think what you're supposed to do is to take these little magnetic sticky pieces and put them on the bottom of these counters and use these. But there's only enough to do it one way, so I was really curious to see how this mechanic worked and see if I'd liked it. And now that I've gone this way, it doesn't really seem possible to use these strength counters and magnets on these other ones because you don't have enough sticky pieces to do that. And I do kind of like the vertical element of the gameplay there too. So again, it feels like something that was very well intended, it's super creative and it's very visionary. It's not quite there yet. It needs another level of iteration, another level of refinement, I think, to bring forward this designer's impressions and designer's ideas for how to do this in a different way. And with that, I think I would like to segue into some final thoughts on the game. I think a couple things about this. Again, the word that comes to my mind for this game and for this design team is promising. This again is their first wargame entry in Wargaming, and I think for a first team, a small design team, putting together out something of this quality with this kind of innovation and this kind of vision and creativity, it's extremely promising. I think that as they get a number of wargames under their belt, I think we're going to see some really exciting things. So I definitely think Princeps Games is a wargaming company to keep an eye on, and their newest release, Freezing Inferno, will be coming out in a few months. We'll be shipping in a few months. So we'll get a chance to examine that one in its final form as that one moves forward. So a big element of this is I'm very excited to see what this company has in its future. I think half dozen games down the line, I think they could be doing some incredibly creative and innovative things where a lot of these ideas that you can kind of see coming to fruition are really going to reach kind of a final and polished form. And when you see designers kind of taking on unique challenges and trying to bring some innovation and creativity to wargaming like this, I think there's a lot of potential for greatness that's going to be coming out of this studio. In terms of where we are with March of the Drina, I think again I go back to what I mentioned earlier in the game. I feel like this is a good yet not quite great wargame. With all that in mind, the question would be, who would I recommend this game to? Well, I think I would definitely recommend this game if you're interested in World War I history, because again, the gameplay is solid, it's smooth, it's going to play out nice and easy, you're going to get an ebb and flow to the game, and you're going to get a great sense of this theater of World War I's conflict and history. You're going to learn a lot from playing this game, and that's a very positive experience. I think this also because of its really strong visual appeal and because of its accessible rule set. Rulebook is really good and sharp and clear. I didn't have any problems really learning the game in that regard at all. So I think this is going to be a great game that you can play for kind of a lighter fare, if you would, for an evening of wargaming. You definitely can play the whole thing out in 3 hours. So, you know, you have dinner, start it, you can learn it and play it probably in, 3 hours to play, 2 to 3 hours to play, maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes to kind of get down the basic mechanics and jump right in. So from that sense, it's got an accessible kind of lighter feeling to it. So if you're looking for that type of game for an evening and want to learn some World War I history, I think this is a very strong choice. The other element in there too, if you've got younger kids that you want to introduce to wargaming, or if you've got friends that haven't played many war games, I think this is a game because hex encounters, it's got some really cool kind of mechanics. Cavalry, infantry, artillery all work very differently. You've got command and control. Really like, I know I didn't mention this in the review either, the deeper review, I really like the production system in this game. So as you're taking cities, you're gaining more capacity to be able to reinforce your units and to keep your forces up to strength. And as you're losing cities, you're losing that. So that's really well executed. It's easy to execute, really nice feeling to the game. So again, there's a lot of positives here that I think make a good case for it being a game you'd want to recommend in a lot of cases to wargamers. And with that, that brings us to a close. If you have liked this video, here's a link to an overview of Freezing Inferno, which is the upcoming war game from Princeps Games. You can take a look at that and see some further iteration on the innovative ideas that started out with March of Drina. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.